My name is Josh Goldman from 22nd Street Imaging. You can follow me on Instagram at 22nd Street Imaging, and be sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel if you like what you see. Today, I'm going to compare self-portraits taken on a film camera versus self-portraits taken on a digital camera. This idea was inspired by a video from Braden at Film Supply Club. He encouraged photographers to create while confined at home due to the pandemic by attempting the art of the self-portrait. I'll link his excellent video in the description below. I brought out my trusty Canon A-1 35mm camera loaded with Portra 400 and the Canon EOS R and got to shooting. Now before I show you what I was able to create, I have a few disclaimers up front. First, I'm new to film photography. I've been shooting digital for almost a decade, but picked up film on a whim. Second, this is not a perfect one-to-one comparison. While I matched the shutter speed at 1/60th of a second and shot at the same ISO, the film was rated at ASA 400 and the digital camera was set to ISO 400, the lenses I used, and therefore the aperture I selected for each, was different. For the Canon A1, I used my tried and true Canon FD 50mm 1.8. For the Canon EOS R, I used the only lens I had, which was the Canon 24-105mm f4. I did match the focal length for each at 50mm, but had to change the aperture between the two setups. This was mainly due to the fact that I had limited light and needed to open the FD lens on the film camera as wide as it would go to ensure I didn't underexpose the film. With more latitude to underexpose on the digital image, I set the aperture to its widest setting at f4. Lastly, I really hate getting my picture taken, so getting over that was a challenge in and of itself. With all that said, let's get into the images. After a few different setups, I have 3 photos to compare. Because this wasn't a perfect one-to-one comparison, I'm looking less at comparing the camera's ability to produce nice bokeh, for example, than I am at the quality and feel of the photos that were made. When looking at the photographs side by side, there are definitely pros and cons to each format. Let's start with digital. The Canon EOS R is an incredibly user-friendly camera. The ability to autofocus means that you get a razor-sharp image 99% of the time. That's true for both regular photography and self-portraits. The color information from these images is also fantastic. Both setups were lit with simple and frankly not super bright 3-point lighting, a key, a fill, and a small hair light located just out of frame. And yet, the digital images seem punchier even despite the fact that the aperture was set at f4. Perhaps the color can be attributed to the editing I did, but I tried to treat both the digital images and the film images with the same care when color grading the final exposures to bring out the natural colors in the scene. I think it comes down to the fact that you simply have a wealth of information in a raw digital file when you bring it into Lightroom or Photoshop. Likely the biggest benefit of shooting digital is the ability to experiment and perfect. With a big enough memory card and a full battery, you could theoretically shoot for hours to get the perfect shot. When you're working by yourself and attempting to be the subject in the photos as well, having the option to review your work on an LCD screen is invaluable. The biggest con shooting digital might be the level of detail you get from the image. Now, this might not seem like a bad thing. Detail is good, right? But when I'm looking at the images, there's something that's less appealing when you can see every pore and every strand of hair in such detail. It just makes the images feel, for lack of a better way of putting it, digitally produced. Now let's talk about film. One disadvantage is the cost. A roll of Portra 400 can run about $10 and can cost around $30 to ship it to a lab, have it developed, and have it scanned. But perhaps the biggest disadvantage to shooting self-portraits with a film camera is the uncertainty in what you are actually capturing. Am I in focus? For me, most of the time, I wasn't. Did I expose the frame correctly? I used a light meter, so hopefully, but who knows? The bottom line is that you never really know until you've had the film developed and scanned. But that uncertainty can also be a pro. There's a level of concentration and preparation with making a film image that you just don't get snapping 10 times as many pictures on a digital camera. Each frame is thoughtfully and deliberately composed. With only 36 exposures on a 35mm camera, you have to be intentional with what you're doing. In a world where everything moves so fast, it's nice to slow down and take your time. Film is also a tactile process. There's nothing quite like loading a roll of film into the camera, advancing it, and hearing the shutter fire as you capture a moment in time. To have a physical version of your work in developed negatives is even better. it really feels like you made something instead of just capturing a digital equivalent. In the actual image, film produces really great colors, albeit a bit different from digital. The highlights and the shadows both look good, and the image itself is a bit softer. Now, the softness could be due to the wide open aperture, as I've gotten sharper images stopping down a bit. But in the case of these self-portraits, I quite like the result. There's also something about the film images that feels timeless. I don't know if this is nostalgia, but unlike the digital images, they feel like they could stand the test of time. So which is better? I think it depends on personal preference. For me, if you capture a good film photo and nail your focus, the result can be hard to beat, and that would be my preference. But there's also the benefit of being able to produce images that you can see right away in the case of digital. Perhaps the best combination is using a digital camera to practice compositions, poses, different wardrobe and exposure, before switching to the film camera for your final shot. Ultimately, it comes down to what you prefer. That's all for this video. I have a lot more ideas for videos in the future, so be sure to come back and see what I have coming. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.